Okay, so this is the overview talk for the Camerata task. It's called Natural Language Queries Derived from Exam Papers, Articles and Other Sources Against Classical Music Scores in MusicXML. And I'm Richard Sutcliffe, and I'm delighted to have with me Cynthia, who is not only a leading figure in the world of music information retrieval, but she's also a trained musician who studied at the Royal Conservatory in The Hague. And she's very kindly agreed to play some of the examples in the talk as we go along. And also a quick mention that the other participants in the organisation, Tom Collins, Edward Hovy, Richard Lewis, Chris Fox and Deane Root. So I'm going to be talking about the motivation for the talk, then the way in which we designed the task, and then something about the evaluation, and then the results we've got from this year, because this is now the third year of the Camerata task. So just to remind you what this is about, the input is a short line phrase in English referring to musical features in a classical music score, and participants also have the score itself, which is in MusicXML, which is a standard representation for music scores, which is machine readable. And the required answer is the exact location in the score of the requested musical feature. And just to motivate this, essentially my first interest in this was because I was reading musicological texts and seeing various references to music. And I was wondering whether it would be possible to link these to parts of the score. And there are some examples here which are taken from a monograph by Anthony Hopkins on the symphonies of Beethoven, and an article by Derek Cook about the symphonies of Bruckner, which is in Grove's Dictionary of Music and Musicians. And we're just going to illustrate these. So the first one from Anthony Hopkins is repeated crotchet chords. The second one, tonic triad of E major. And the third one is a giant unison G from the entire orchestra. So these are examples of real references to musical events in texts, and this is a kind of illustration of what they would actually mean to someone who is a musician. Then also we're interested, as a second thing, to allow experts to search scores interactively using phrases. For example, if the phrase was triplet quavers against a chord in the bass, so that gives an idea how it could sound. And our third motivation is to help students learn music theory. So if there was a feature they wanted to know what it would sound like, so they typed in perfect cadence, that's what they would be looking for, something sounding a bit like that. So that's what we're kind of aiming for. So there are 200 queries, and we're trying to find the answers to those queries, basically. Now, the way we identify the right answer is by passages and divisions. Basically, we have a vertical line at the start of the feature and a vertical line at the end of the feature. So the one that we see here, essentially, it's saying that the passage has got 4 beats to the bar, 4 crotchet beats to the bar. We're going to measure our answer in crotchets or quarter notes, which is a sort of standard, the most common type of note in music. We're going to start at the first measure or first bar, that's a kind of division of the music, and the first beat of it, that's a 1 colon 1, and we're going to finish at the second bar after the 4th beat. So we start before the first beat and after the 4th beat. That's just an idea of how this actually works. The divisions value is a value we get from MusicXML. That allows us to demarcate anything we want. So if we want to just demarcate to the nearest crotchet or quarter note, we can make it 1. But if we have, let's say, quavers, we can make it divisions 2. And quaver triplets, we can make it divisions 3. So by choosing a suitable value of the divisions, we can demarcate any musical interval we like. And in this task, we specify the divisions to be used in the answer. So we compute a value of the divisions, which will do for all possible answers. Now, here is an example of questions and answers. So if you just play the entire example here. And the first query is C, D, E, F, D, E, C in semiquavers, repeated after a semiquaver. So you just play that passage alone, the first box there. So basically we're specifying notes here, the C, D, E, these are notes, but the actual octave pitch is not specified in the question. So when it comes up in the bass there, repeated, it's an octave below, but that is allowed. So we're allowing quite complicated queries. Now the second query there is semiquaver F sharp in the treble against a crotchet C in the bass. If you just play that. So there we've got a crotchet at the bottom of the blue box there, and then we've got our quaver F sharp at the top. And this query is asking for them both to be played at the same time. That's what against means. And just to explain, where it says 4:13, that means that we are beating in semiquavers. That's these notes with the two black lines going along above them. And we're starting at the 13th semiquaver. So if you can count from the top there, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So the F sharp in the blue box is the 13th, and we're going to the end of that quaver. So it's actually 4:13 to 4:13 because we start before and finish after a particular note. Now, just a reminder that the query types have changed over the years. So basically in 2014, they're all pretty simple. Most of these queries are basically notes. And then at the bottom, we had harmonic intervals, cadences, triads, and textures. So most of them were just simple notes, basically. In 2015, we changed our categories, and we allowed not only single notes, which are the one melode, but also the multiple notes, which are an n melode. So one melode is basically one note, n melode is multiple notes, and then one harm is some kind of single chord. And then we had, as before, texture, which we'll illustrate a bit later, and also follow and sync. So follow was where one thing came after another, and then the sync was where one thing was simultaneous. We just saw that in our previous example. So moving to 2016, it became more complicated again. So we have one melode, n melode, one harm, and then we added n harm as well. With n harm, we've got sequences of chords. So our cadences now are put into the n harm category that we didn't have before. And we have various other things as well. For example, you have at the top there 3 consecutive thirds and also an A5 pedal. So some more sophisticated harmonic events can be categorized like that. Once again, we have texture, and they all add up to 200. In addition, ranging over those categories, we have the follow and the sync. So you can see from here that the queries are starting to become pretty complicated in the task now. So we turn to this another example here. If you just like to play that, Cynthia. So in this case, the query is a 3-note chord in the harpsichord right hand against a 2-note chord in the harpsichord left hand in measures 45 to 52. So it's a pretty complicated query syntactically and semantically. And if you could just play the chord in the red box, are you able to do that? Okay, so that is the chord, and you can see there are 2 notes in the left hand. Could you just play the left hand and the right hand? So there's 2 notes in the left hand and 3 notes in the right hand. And then we have the second, there's another answer to the same query. Just play the blue box there. Okay, so once again we have 3 notes in the right hand and 2 notes in the left hand. So this gives an idea of the kinds of queries we have. Now if we turn to this example, if you just play this one. here we have imitation, which we haven't had in the previous tasks. Imitation in the left hand and voice in measures 1 to 6. So if you just play what's in the red box, you'll see it coming up in the piano and then the voice. There it is in the piano, you see. Now in the voice. So that shows imitation, so it's a kind of more complicated feature. And this was one of several types of query that this year we derived from GCSE and A-level exam papers. So these are music theory exams that people in England take at the age of 16 and 18. And this is an example of a cadence. If you just play the part in the blue box, if you could. Okay, so that's an example of a perfect cadence. So it's coming from the 5th note of the scale down to the tonic. So that's an example of type of query we had in all 3 years of the task. We've had cadences, but some of them are getting more and more complicated to spot. So about the scores in 2016, we have a usual variety, 20 scores, ranging from the Renaissance up to the sort of early Romantic period, and varying in staves between 2 going through 4. That's the number of lines of music that's in the score, up to 18. So the most complicated score was actually the And the Glory, which we saw earlier, because half of the score was above the screen, because I was only showing part of it. The other complicated scores, we had a movement from Mozart's 40th Symphony and from the 3rd Symphony of Beethoven. So just a note about evaluation. How do we know the answer is correct? Well, as I said, we put a line through the music in one place and a line through music in the second place. That is the answer. And we have strict and lenient measures, so beat correct means it's exactly the right place at the beginning, exactly the right place at the end. Measure correct means it's in the right bar or measure at the beginning and the right bar or measure at the end. And in many practical cases, that will be quite sufficient. So we can have measure precision, measure recall, measure F, and beat precision, beat recall, and beat F in normal definitions. Now, participants this year, we had 10 people that registered for the task, but 4 people returned runs in the end, and I'm delighted to say that 2 of them are here at the meeting today, and one of them has sent a recording, which we'll watch. I don't think we would be watching it on the plane, this other video. I don't think it would be suitable for that task, but it might tell us something about how they were working on this sort of thing. Now, just to review the results. Now, remember that in 2014, most of it was notes. So a note, B flat or something like that, crotchet C, and with some modifications, crotchet C on the oboe. That was as complicated as it got. So the answers always look at the F. Where my cursor is there, the BF column is the most important column, because that's the strict measure, the F measure, F1 basically. So you've got a CLAS, an Australian participant, you've got a very high F, 0.797 in 2014. Now he repeated the feat in 2015 with very high F, 0.620. Now, this year the task has got a lot more difficult, and some of the participants from the previous years have been unable to take part, unfortunately. So this year we've gone way down to a BF of less than 0.1 in the task. Now, it's partly because these participants were mostly not at the previous years, and secondly, the task has become considerably more complicated. But we can look at the BF versus the MF. This is quite illuminating. If you look at the recall figures, they tend to be very low, whether it's strict or lenient. But the precision is not bad. So if you look at Deane, it had the highest precision at 0.420 on the first column on the left-hand side, the top row there. So that means that the results returned by Deane were fairly correct, but the proportion of results returned was obviously very, very low. And if you look at the measure precision for the same system, Deane, that's at 0.640. So if you look at down the MP column on the right-hand side there, third from the right, for all the participants, you see that the first three of them are not bad at all. They're 0.64, 0.6, 0.5. These aren't bad at all. The UMFC system was a kind of experiment using recurrent neural nets, and it did return very good answers to one or two of the questions. Most of the other questions it didn't, but I think it just didn't have enough time to work on the whole thing and get a really good system together, because it is a big commitment of time for people. So the results by question type, usually we can use this to judge how difficult a particular question is. So this was at 2014, you can see it descending by BF. So you can see that the simple length was the easiest. That's the third column, second row there, at 0.810. And you can see as we get to things like cadences, then the BF is going down to 0.095, just about 0.1. So even in the first year, some of the questions were not well answered. And of course, there are many more of those difficult questions than there were previously. Then we can see a similar trend in the second year. And you can see that the performance of texture on this row here, the performance of texture is 0 for the strict measure, but with the lenient measure, it has come down to being reasonable figures. So that was it's quite illustrative of the fact that in many cases people are good at measuring the right bar or measure, not so good at measuring the right beat. But we must also bear in mind that in this task there is some ambiguity about exactly where the beat of something starts and where it ends. If you remember the cadence that we heard earlier, cadence is a very good example. It's not that clear where they start and where they end in real pieces. Obviously in a simple oral test or something, the examiner always makes it really, really clear. But in real examples, it's much more subtle. Now, a question type here, if you look at the BF column, you can see that the figures are all very low. But if you look at, for example, the measure precision, that's where we can see that on one Molod questions, the measure precision was about a half, and then it's going down from there. And interestingly, the measure precision on follow questions is quite high. This is because one of the participants was very good at answering these kinds of questions. But generally, the performance this year has been disappointingly low. So the overall conclusions are this was a very difficult task for the participants to do. I think it was the first task where, the first year, that was essential to be fairly expert at natural language processing. And I don't think any of the participants were fairly expert at natural language processing. So this was a big problem, because to analyze those complicated queries, you need that capability. So just to finish off, we'll show you 3 more examples using the most interesting query types against follow and texture. So if we just start with this one. So here the query is dotted crotchet against quavers in the bass. So this is one of the queries we've been investigating, where there's one thing and another thing. So if you just play the first box there. So there we've got on the right hand at the top there, we've got the dotted crotchet, and at the bottom we've got the 3 notes, and the other 3 boxes are pretty comparable if you like to play them. So again, these are 3 examples of 3 answers. So a system would have to retrieve all of those to get a recall of a 1, basically. And then there's a second query against the same thing, a dotted crotchet followed by D5. So if you just play the contents of the red box. So what this illustrates is that one thing is followed by another. So we've got one dotted crotchet followed by a quaver, basically. Finally, we've got a two-part texture in bars 1 to 28. So that's just, if you just play the last 4 bars there. So there we've got a two-part textures, one part in the right hand and one part in the left hand. So this is a kind of texture question, which is a measure of the general type of music that we're listening to. So those are examples of some of the more complicated queries. They're quite interesting things, quite hard to spot, and quite hard to analyze the query to work out that that's what it is. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much.